Howdy folks, welcome to Camera Shake, where we bring you the insider scoop on all things photography and videography, giving you a unique opportunity to stay ahead of the curve. We spent literally hundreds of hours interviewing some of the most renowned photographers of our time, giving you access to knowledge and expertise that's not available anywhere else. I'm your host, Kirsten Nuts, and in today's episode, we will discover how to create attention-grabbing visuals for social media and how you can change your approach to get eyeballs on your work. Right after this. Welcome to Camera Shake Podcast, episode 160. But hold on, if you enjoy this podcast, please join the Camera Shake community over on camerashakepodcast.com so that you're the first ones to know when we've got some exciting news for you. You'll find the link in the description, or if you're watching on YouTube and I don't forget to put it there, it'll be right down here somewhere on the screen. But without further ado, let's give it up for today's special guest, the Photoshop guru, illustrator, author, educator, the design ninja himself. Give it up for Mr. Tony Harmer. Tony, how's it going?
Hey man, it's good, thank you. Thank you for having me along.
Well, great to have you on the show. I believe we met at the photography show.
We did.
Last time. And I know you've had multiple sort of speaking engagement at the show. How did it go for you there?
Yeah, it was good. It was good. I'm always there to wreak my own 3 hours of havoc in easily digestible chunks. So no, it's good. I like doing the photography show. I just wish it was every year again.
Yeah, it's a great environment. I've only been there for the last 2 years, so since the pandemic, really. And of course, the first year was a little bit, it was a little bit quieter. But last year was great, actually, I thought.
Yeah, it was good. It was good, but I can understand why they're, maybe thinking, well, every other year is better, but there's probably a whole load of reasons for that, which I don't know. But anyway, it's good that it's still there. That's the main thing. I love doing that show.
Exactly. Tony, you've been, I called you a Photoshop guru and the design ninja himself. I mean, you've been educating online for at least, I would say, since 2014 or even longer than that?
Okay, yeah, so even longer than that. Really, the first time I got attached to a major library would have been with lynda.com, and that was in 2014. So that started back then. So that's pretty good. Before that, I used to have a thing called 4T, which was one of the first things that brought me to the attention of Adobe, and that ran since 2004, so 10 years before that. And that was Tony's Tips, Tricks, Techniques. Oh my word. That seems like a whole other lifetime ago. But yeah, no, so I've done that. But formal courses and everything for about 10 years, yeah.
What motivated you originally to get into teaching?
Well, I've been a lecturer as well, to be honest. I've done part-time lecturing. I lectured at the City of Bath College. I lectured at Strode College in Somerset. I've done guest lecturing bits all over the place. For anybody that sees my face, they know that I'm well and truly over 21. And I've got a lot of stuff in my head that I've acquired over my lifetime. It's pointless just keeping that all in my head. I'd much rather put that out into the world to help people develop and hopefully exceed anything I've ever done. So, that's it. That is the motivation for doing it. I mean, to teach lecturing, motivation certainly isn't money. The money's okay, but it is only okay. Online teaching slightly different. There can be decent money attached to that. But that's not the reason I do it. I just like sharing. It's a good thing to do.
You seem to have a real passion for teaching, and I think that really comes across in the way that you teach and the approaches that you use. When you first got into online teaching, which at the time was sort of a new medium, were you immediately aware that was going to be a really effective way to teach people?
It felt like more of an effective way than it actually was at the time. So when I very first began, not the lynda.com stuff, but before that, back in like the 4T stuff and all of that stuff, it was still for some people, it was still a little bit of an investment to actually try and watch any videos online back then, and then of course, that seems fantastical to say that, given that it was only 20 years ago, right? But 20 years ago, things were very different. And when I lived in rural Somerset, so at that particular time, and it wasn't the best infrastructure to be trying that on. But yeah, I mean, it was obvious that it was going to become a thing.
20 years ago, I remember, because I was living just outside of Milton Keynes, which, is a city, type of thing.
Yeah.
But I lived in a small village. And I remember, when I wanted to download a movie, I had to literally set up the download in the morning so that by the evening, the whole movie had downloaded so I could watch it.
It's crazy. So if people needed to, I mean, YouTube wasn't the competitive place that it now is for that stuff. And in fact, it didn't even dawn on me about using YouTube until much, much later. I guess that would have been, I'm just thinking actually, that would have probably been about 2010, maybe a little bit after that even. Because it just wasn't a thing, it just wasn't where I put my stuff, or, but yeah, these days, of course, you can put hour-long things on and people can watch them, and I do. So I put on 3 hours a week. So, there's plenty of stuff.
And, now that we have YouTube, which literally can teach us anything and everything that we want to learn about. I mean,
theoretically,
yeah. I mean, I learned how to how to change the sealant on my bathtub on YouTube the other day. The problem I always find with YouTube is that, the problem is, especially when you first get into a new subject, like let's say you start out with photography, for example, or you start out with Photoshop or how to fix your bathroom or whatever. In the very beginning, you don't really know what you don't know. And, and YouTube is this massive sea of information, and it's really easy to get dragged into that whole thing and, sink hard and fast like the Titanic, in and amongst all of this, all of these like hundreds and thousands of videos that trying to teach you one thing and another thing. It's very difficult to kind of see, okay, where's the progression routine? Now, I come from an education background as well. I used to teach music for a long time.
Cool.
And I know how important progression is, and having a clearly mapped out progression route through the whole thing. And, even in guitar, actually, to be honest, learning how to play guitar is a great thing on YouTube, because there's a myriad of different content on there. But if I were a new guitar player now and I went into YouTube, it'd be so difficult to not get confused with the wealth of stuff that's out there.
Yeah. The part of the problem is that, it is somewhere you can go to learn anything. And a lot of the time, you kind of, popular content does lead you to places, although not always, and especially not in the creative industries, because you need to qualify out the people who are delivering that training, or you can end up in the polar position from where you actually want to be. So just expanding on that slightly just for a moment. So I worked with Adobe as a contractor for a number of years before I was on staff. And when I did join on staff, part of my job was workflow analysis, because I am apparently a workflow expert. I understand creative workflows with Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, and more beyond that. And so I would go into big organizations, like real big brand names to their creative departments, and see if I could help them. Well, I had to study partly of what they were doing, but also at the same time, in order for sort of a quid pro quo arrangement for that study to take place, there were several reasons for that going on. I would have an afternoon or a day where I would train their creative staff, and I would observe some crazy practices that were taking inordinate amounts of time for something that could be done in a snap. This was often the case, and I would ask them where they learn the application they were doing. So some people learned on the job, but the vast majority would say, YouTube. And that's the risk. It's there and it's freely available. but you never know. The person might be great. They might be really personable. They might be very good looking. There might be a whole bunch of other things, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're qualified out to deliver that training to you. And that's where you can end up chasing your own tail. That's the worry around that.
And it's always, I think it's, if you're looking for something very specific, like, skin retouching, let's say, you can get some really good videos that will teach you how to retouch skin in 15 minutes or something, right?
Yeah.
To an acceptable level. And then you can deep dive into it if you wanted to. But for instance, for me as a portrait photographer, the entire retouching process encompasses much more than just retouching skin.
Yeah.
And at that point, I think that there's an advantage in having a structured, progression-led course almost that basically takes you from, well, I'm going to turn on my computer and upload my images to here's the final product with all the stages in between. And of course, things like lynda.com or Creative Live and stuff like that, offer those kind of progression routes.
Yeah. And that is the best way to approach it. Yeah, if you've got an immediate need for a solution, then perhaps you have to just go in and chance your arm. But if you actually want to do something well, you're absolutely right. There is a progression. Okay, so I mean, YouTube does things like, if you've got an immediate need, then you can probably meet that. If you're in a hurry, there's something you've got to learn to do. And just using music here as an analogy, right? If you were a bass player, you could teach a bass, or if you had to play a bass line for whatever reason, you could teach someone to play Wild Thing in about 10 minutes, and that would be fine, provided they got some sense of timing. But where to actually down the fret and whatever that would, or down the strings on the fret, then that would be fine. But if you needed to actually do anything more elaborate than that, then of course you'd need a progression. You'd need to understand more about the fretboard. You need to, and so on, plucking techniques, all of these different things. So YouTube's great for that, but you're right. Progression is exactly what you need. So a friend of mine, Lisa Carney, I'm sure you've heard of Lisa Carney. She's a legend in the retouching world. She does movie posters, all of that good stuff. And she teaches, I believe, hers as a progressive form. It's like, I know you want to do this right now, but before you do this, you have to understand this. You have to understand color. You have to, or light primarily, then color, then patterns, and then about different skin types, and then about, because you can't just pluck the skin from your cheek or your forehead and drop it under your eyes. It's like, hello, something's not right here. I think it's 5 different types of skin, I think, on the face, something like that. It's been a while since I've done anything like that, but there has to be some sort of progression for you to get it. And anything with any value, there's a progression to doing it. If you could do it instantly and it was easy, there would be no value in it.
Absolutely. I remember speaking to Lisa. Lisa was actually on the show a few weeks ago, or a couple of months ago. I will put the link. If you're watching on YouTube, I'll put the link somewhere up there. It's a very interesting conversation as well. The thing about creating progression in that sense, what I used to do when I used to teach guitar was that, I'd have kids come in and they'd be like, I want to play this song, whatever, by Guns N' Roses or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And they were clearly technically not capable of playing the song, but what I would do is I would find something in that song that they could play or that they could learn. Like it might be the intro of the song, or it might be, the chords in the chorus, or it might be, whatever. Like there'd be a little thing in there that they could get stuck in and learn. And it wouldn't be the whole song in its entirety, but it'd be a little thing. And it would basically give them the motivation to carry on, and to get better. And 6 months down the line, a year down the line, they'd be able to play the whole thing maybe, or they I had lots of kids coming in wanting to play like Van Halen, for example. There's really no chance you can play Van Halen solo if you've only been playing the guitar for 6 months.
Very.
But there is stuff that you can play, and it's maybe, again, like I said, maybe the chords in the verse of the intro or something like that. What sort of teaching methods and approaches if you find most effective, particularly in the online teaching world?
Right. So, I mean, actually, first of all, I'm very, very lucky in that I've got an excellent producer, Susan, who I've worked with for pretty much the whole time, with only a couple of small exceptions in doing things that were outside of her knowledge area. And she has been a great coach for those things. So the way she's helped me so much with my approach to doing things in understanding. I mean, I've always been pretty lucky that I've had an understanding of the people learning it are maybe learning it for the first time. They've never seen anything else. So you have to make sure that your steps are measured and that meet as many people as they can. You need to not alienate yourself from people who have no experience or people who have a lot of experience. You've got to find a way of keeping both of those ends into your teaching. The key thing for me, and the thing I think that has got me quite a few people learning my stuff, is humor. I use humor a lot to make points around what I'm doing, because I see that as being hooks. Yeah. If people remember, you can't do it humor for humor's sake. People aren't learning from me on how to be a comedian. There are far better people they could learn that from. But a little bit of humor at the right place to form a hook is the thing that I value most in my teaching, that I will try and inject most. It has to be appropriate, has to be contextual. Yeah. But humor is the thing that I approach most, and a structure that tries to keep everyone engaged. So changing things on the screen every 5 seconds is handy, but not always. Nobody wants to look at an interface of Photoshop, with even an image parked on it for more than 5 seconds, because your mind will drift. You'll start thinking about other things. You won't focus on what you're teaching. And so that was one of the first things I picked up, is try wherever possible to roll the content on or have something move in that 5 seconds. Even if you're opening a toolbar while you're explaining something, or you're navigating around the image, anything to keep that going. And then when you think like that, you start to teach like that. You start to build that into your teaching. Hopefully that makes sense, but that's kind of the way I work it.
Absolutely. I mean, especially more recently, of course, technology and software are like constantly evolving. There's been massive strides that have been made, especially by Adobe, for example. More recently, we've talked about, about AI as part of Adobe
that
Photoshop.
Everyone wants to talk about at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
How do you stay updated on the latest trends in that regard?
So one of the things I do is I commit myself, and I've done this for about 5, 6, 7 years, something like that. I learn for 15 minutes every day. Now, I don't always learn the same thing related to a piece of software, but I do allocate myself at least 15 minutes of every day to learn something. I try wherever possible to stay engaged with the different pre-release groups that I'm involved in. That's the best place, because you see things as they're coming along, and Adobe are a lot more friendly around their pre-release groups these days, and also more open, I think, than they've ever been before. So that's another way that I learn. But really, it's that 15 minutes a day, just taking something from there and thinking, right, okay, tomorrow I want to learn more about creating effective prompts. Yeah. So tomorrow I'm going to find what I need, and I'm going to spend 15 minutes at least looking at that. Yeah. Make a couple of notes, maybe come back to it the next day. But I also think that variety is the spice of life. So if you want to leave it on the back burner and come back to it after 2 or 3 days, that's also fine. But that's how it's. And I write off basically August and September of every year.
Do you find it difficult to sort of change your curriculum, like constantly as there's new features that pop up in Photoshop?
Not difficult. And I like the fact that bizarrely, some people follow my courses. They watch each year's version, the whole thing. They don't just like go and pick some updates from somewhere. And because I have this data, they watch the whole, I don't have it personalized, but we have a thing where we can see returning learners that come along and how and what they watch, and of course they watch the whole thing all over again, which is great. So there's new stuff in there every year. It doesn't change it. It doesn't, I have to try and include the new things, but only if they fit the parameters of the course that I'm delivering. So my essentials courses, they don't need necessarily some things that may have been introduced at that particular time. They're not what I would consider an essential. But the courses that I do for people like Photoshop, for in-house designers, yeah. So that's for people who don't necessarily capture images, but people who have to work with them at scale in there. Those will get more of new feature type stuff, because they're already in the game. They're already working and doing that for a brand or an agency or whatever. And things that will help them, yeah, they'll get more of that. Yeah, so it depends on the context of the course. If it's for an in-house course, yeah, then they'll get a lot more new stuff. But it's just, play is the best way to learn all of these things. Yeah.
It was an interesting thing you mentioned there, and this is really something I want to talk to you about, in particular, in conjunction with social media and the way that we market ourselves and the impact that imagery has on social media. One of the things that happens really all the time is that as a photographer, of course, we're working with designers who use our images to design posters, flyers, social media posts, and all the rest of it. And it's quite an intricate relationship, I think, between photographer and designer, in a sense. But before I get into that, can you explain why attention-grabbing visuals are essential for engaging audiences on platforms, let's say, like Instagram, for example?
Okay. So, well, I mean, you could see, if you see a grid of things, so quite often these days when you actually go to the home screen, you see just either got a scroll or you've got a grid of content. And you have to look at, what you have to do is just be analytical on that and look at it and say, why is that grabbing my attention? Yeah. Now, if it's somebody in which you may be interested in on a physical level, you need to kind of get rid of that straight away and just think, yeah, that's a different, much more basic way of looking at things. You need to look at this stuff there and base it on its color, its composition. Composition is one of the biggest things you can change to make an impact. Yeah, and there are so many different systems we can use to do that, but that's what you need to do. Where is the subject of that particular image? Where are they positioned in the frame? Why are they positioned that way? Do you think, because you can never always know for truth. Is it an accident? Is it on purpose? Are they trying to, unsettle you for whatever reason? But you need to look at those grids of things. It's a very, very competitive world, and a grid will show you that straight away. When you've got all of those things, you can see how competitive it is.
It's incredible it's incredibly competitive, not only necessarily on the same platform, but also, across different platforms. And then you've got, different media types that you can contend with nowadays. Even, if you're promoting your own business as a photographer, for example, you almost have to have knowledge of video, for example, these days, because otherwise, so what would you say are some of the key elements and techniques that can help photographers capture images specifically tailored to social media platforms?
Well, not always in capture, of course. That's the thing. So sometimes something that you capture may be suitable for one medium, but may need a little bit of help in a medium like Instagram, for example. As it happens, I kind of like shooting square, from my phone. When I do anything with my phone, I kind of like that. I can, because it forces you to think more about what you're doing, in that particular format. But composition is the first thing that can help with that. It's always composition. Yeah. If you're going to tell a story with an image, composition and the way you lead an eye around an image is the number one thing you should perhaps think about. Yeah. And secondary to that, then all of the other things around building that image. In terms of working on them afterwards to change them from the format you intended or you saw when you captured it. I have two tricks. Well, they're not really tricks, but I have two things that I use all the time. I am a big fan of neutral density layers, neutral density gradients, because they are a really good way to draw the eye into a particular part of the image. Super big fan of that. I use them all the time. I actually use them in other applications from that. I even use them in, I don't know if you know what Adobe Express is, but I've even used them in there. I have a neutral density layer at a certain size, right? I have a few different gradients on there, and I use those in Creative Cloud libraries and drop them onto content in Adobe Express to put things together quickly. And another thing is vignetting. I find vignetting, you don't have to be full on super old hood shape vignettes on there. Even the softest vignette applied properly can do wonders for an image, because that's why they're there. I mean, originally, of course, they were there because they were a function of the way that a light hit a plate in the back of a box camera. You know, that was the way it is. But they are a really useful focal device, and because we can put them on artificially, we can engineer the way they are. And if you're using things like Camera Raw, you're not restricted to just one single vignette. Of course, you can use, you know, the raw, not necessarily the raw interpreter. You can in the raw interpreter, but even the filter, yeah, you can use it there. So those are the things that help. That composition, yeah, and guiding the eye, yeah, with light are the two best tips I can give you for creating impactful images, I think.
I think that's a really important tip. I don't remember the last image that I put out that didn't have some form of vignette.
Yeah,
you know, on it.
I mean, your head's in a rose here. I mean, they've got great focus. They've got really great, and this is the thing. This is the difficulty where two terms mean slightly different things. Of course, photographers, you think focus, is this sharp? Yeah, but when you're dealing with an image, focus has a different meaning. Where do you want the eye to end up and linger? Yeah, that's what you're actually asking. So but great photographers normally use sharp. Is this sharp? That's what they understand. Focus is something that you do at the time of capture, right? So, but it's still those two words being used and they meaning different things. But yeah, vignetting, neutral density gradients, great way to bring in focus.
Yeah, I mean, especially in the Three Heads in a Row series, the whole idea is to center the attention onto the face. Everything draws you to the face. You know,
I love them.
Oh, great! Thanks, man. Working.
Yeah, no, I really do.
Yeah, there's some funny ones coming out over the next few weeks.
Yeah, I especially like Dave Williams. Dave Williams is brilliant.
Oh yeah. I've shot him several times actually as part of that, and they're always good.
Yeah, he's got a super expressive face, that guy.
I know. His face is like, it's like one of these spinning image, figures. You could just mold it into anything.
I'm sure he loves that.
Yeah, no. But
go on.
But yeah, I mean, everything's designed to draw the attention to the face, and then within the face, actually, I sort of see the face as a shape within itself. It's almost like you have a square, which is the main frame, but then you have another oval or a circular type of shape, which is the face, and within that, everything's designed to draw the attention to the eyes. So it's just and that's why I shoot them square as well, because the subject is the center of attention.
Yeah.
And that's why they are in the center. The amount of times people have asked me, like, oh well, shouldn't it be on a third? So, well, no. It's like, what, there's nothing else in the photo. Yeah. That's the thing. So
strangely enough, in the thirds there is a central column.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
But yeah, this is another thing. This is a thing with there's a thing you've hit on there. With grids. Grids are a guide, not a rule. Yeah, so everybody thinks they need to aim exactly for that intersection, of the lines in a rule of thirds grid. Yeah. They're a device to proportionally divide up a space. Yeah. Yes, the human eye is drawn to those 4 points. That is quite true. But that doesn't mean it has to be exactly on that point for it to be a successful composition. Moving things slightly to the left, right, up or down of that point, it's going to work just as well. Equally as I've seen some really great results of people who completely burst the frame and do things where they've got like half a face occupying, almost half the frame, or even 2/3 of that section, or whatever subject. It doesn't necessarily have to be a face. That can be very impactful as well. Think about what could I do to break this up, and to change it from what it is ordinarily. I mean, 3 heads works perfectly the way it is, but there might be other occasions where you think, how could I break that up?
Exactly. And, a good example, for instance, would be something like, like social media banners, like, Facebook banners and so on and so forth. Of course, you want to create some space for text, for example, where you just need negative space in the image. And then, of course, that whole thing falls apart because, it won't be a square and it won't be in the center. And of course, then, things move around a little bit. It just depends on the end use, I suppose.
It does. S4S, shooting for stock.
Yes,
that's the thing.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I always call it shooting with intent. It's a nicer way. It's a less brutal way of saying it. They do. I mean, but this guy, things. Rule of thirds is one of my favorite rectilinear grid system assistants to use. You see when people don't understand a grid, it's like people who shoot landscapes and put the horizon line right smack bang in the middle of the grid and think, well, I'm using a grid and that fits right in the middle of those things. And of course, we know that giving prominence to the sky or the foreground is sometimes the more impactful way of doing it. So you need to play with the grid and see what will happen with that. And another thing is that I used the word rectilinear a moment ago, and I used it on purpose, right? Because don't forget, there are other systems of grids. There's loads of different systems that you could use. And you might want to think, what would happen if I tilted the axis of this and created something, that was using sort of an axial grid to do it, right? So that's the one that is just simply divided by a single line, and that line could be in any orientation inside that image, and that can create some exciting results when you do something. And I mean, typically, so if you ever watched old 60s versions of the series Batman, and if you haven't, you should, because it's so funny. But you'd always notice in there, when they were doing anything with the villains or when there was anything that was wrong, the camera angle was always tilted over, by anything between 5 to 10 degrees, because it's unsettling, in it. So if you want to create a sense of drama like that, then maybe look at what would happen. We're in a digital world, right? Once you've made the initial capture, what you do with it has no downstream consequence until you put it out there. So what's the harm in playing with it and saying, what would happen if I did tilt that over by a few degrees and take it, you need to make it enough so it is actually a statement and not just that you were leaning towards the side when you captured it. And that's the thing. You've either got to go big in that one or just ignore it, so, but that's another thing you can do, I think. I think it's really important to keep an open mind and, as you say, experiment and play with things, because often, we sort of, sometimes we have these rules drilled into our brains, like, for instance, Dutch angles are bad. And, I see this very often in, like, especially in camera club competitions where everything's like, oh, it's dead straight, all the horizons are dead straight. And, and Dutch angles are to be avoided like the plague. And sometimes you go, like, well, but what if?
Why though?
Yeah, why? Exactly. There's no reason. Yeah.
Yeah. The people who say that is because they're favouring a different, they favour their own format. Doesn't mean that I'm not big on rules. In that way. I mean, I know lots of ways in which to efficiently do things and different techniques I can use, but at no point, I don't think any of my courses do I say, you should do it this way or this. I say, this is a way this can be achieved. Or this is a way you might consider doing this. These are the advantages of doing it this way, but I don't think to my recollection, I don't think I've ever said this is the way to do it or the correct way to do it. There are some things where there is a degree of correctness, but that still doesn't rule out the alternatives.
Of course,
Because,
yeah.
How do you know until you've tried?
Exactly. And especially in take Photoshop as an example. There's about 5 different ways that you could do just about anything in Photoshop. And how you approach it depends on so many different things, like your own preference, for example, or just the way you like working, for example, and so on and so forth. I've found that, I very often come across videos, for example, where a particular thing is explained, and I'm thinking, well, that's different from the way I do it. And, and then I think about it and I kind of go, well, is that easier? Does it save me time? Or do I just feel that the way I do it is just more comfortable for me for whatever reason?
Right.
And that's ultimately how I approach things.
Yeah. So I just thought, but actually just a second ago, by the way, about while you were saying that, I just suddenly thought, the perspective crop tool. That's one of the things where you could actually say this is the correct way to do that. Right. So you find 4 points inside of the thing you want to correct the perspective for, or crop to, rather, to create a new crop. So let's say you photographed a poster and you want to bring that, and it's slightly at an angle or whatever, and you want to bring that into full frame. Then that is one of the things where you can say, well, what you do is this. You click at this point here, you click at this point here, here, and here. Look at the grid lines. If they kind of match up with the perspective, you can go ahead and hit return. So that's one of those instances where that is correct. That said, you could still have fun with it.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, you could still push it to used in ways that weren't as described. I have back when I used to do classroom training, so I was an Adobe trainer for 10 years. Okay, and in that time, the Photoshop courses that I used to run, so we'd have like a week of doing Photoshop. That sometimes you'd have split weeks, but generally you'd do a Photoshop masterclass week where you'd take people in intro level on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. You'd be doing something that was much more intermediate leading onwards. And then they would always call I hated the fact that they called the last day the expert day, because it was about as close as learning how to use a first aid kit and then professing yourself to be a doctor, in my opinion. But marketing people market things how they want. So but anyway, that Zero to Hero courses, they were called. But in those, I used to say to people, Photoshop is a lot like Kung Fu. There are many different ways to achieve a result. The best result is the one that works for you. And just like Kung Fu, you will never, ever stop learning Photoshop. Even things that you thought you knew, you could be a quote master, unquote, of Photoshop. Tickles me when people say that. I love it. I think, okay, cool. Right. And that's all I think is, okay then. Right, well, great, cool. But you could be a quote master, unquote master in Photoshop, and someone who's been using it for a day can teach you something, provided you're open to learning it,
That's the beauty of it, though. That's what I love about things like Photoshop, for example. Because I remember last year at some point, I was holding a talk at a camera club, actually. And I was going through a number of different retouching techniques. And then somebody in the audience just went, I was doing this one thing, and somebody in the audience just went, oh, but wouldn't it be easier if you did this? And I just thought, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about this. But it would be easier. And that's how I've been doing it ever since. There you go.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? Yeah, and that's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
That is the absolute beauty of it. I did see someone once who, this was at Max in LA. And actually, it was in LA that year, because there were a couple of years where it was in different places. One year it went to San Diego, another year it went to Las Vegas. And for people who aren't familiar with Max is the big Adobe conference of the year. It's the main event, and it's always held in fall or autumn, depending on how you want to describe it and or refer to it. And there was somebody, and I'm not going to name them, but I was at the back as a Adobe staff member, and they said, and this is the correct way to do it because I'm telling you that, and I am your teacher. Or no, I am the master, or something like that. And I just thought, wow, I'm pretty certain you won't be back here for quite a while. And I was right, as it turned out. They weren't. They're back now, but I think they learned. There's a word called humility that I think they actually picked up at that particular point in their life. But oh man, honestly, it's I prefer that more open approach of this is what I know, yeah. But if you've got something that you think might work, let's have a look at it. Let's see if it creates a new branch for me and for you,
Exactly, because I always think, in any creative endeavor, in my mind anyway, it's the end result that's the important part.
Yeah.
If there's any, the path that we get there, sometimes it's fun, sometimes it's arduous, but if there's a way to make that easier, or to make it less complicated, then I'm always game. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Somebody could tell me, like, for instance, a good example would be, Lightroom masking is a good example. Fairly recently,
which is amazing,
which is incredible, yeah. But it's such an improvement on the previous masking functionality that we had in Lightroom, and it just makes my life so much easier.
Yeah.
I'm all ears when it comes to any technique or anything that makes my life easier, and I can spend more time watching Netflix.
Life goals. It's really
exactly.
But Lightroom masking is a great example because that is something that is super, super useful in that. In other things, so I know that you want to we mentioned that we'd talk a little bit about some of the stuff around generative AI because everybody's talking about generative AI at the moment. One of the things that tickles me a little bit is that when people say it takes the drudgery out of creative work, and I think it's not like going down into the cold, dark earth and fetching back coal. That's the thing. But little things that really do help, like masking in Lightroom, that they are a real bonus. But sometimes, in creativity, the struggle to achieve something can actually be the reason the result looks the way it does, because you're living that little bit more into it. And I do wonder if with, so the Photoshop beta at the moment with the generative fill and that stuff is creating exciting results and creating interesting things. But I do wonder if there's something we'll be missing at some point in the future. I don't know. It's a wide open area, and you have to be. It depends how you use it, I guess. But
sometimes those tools can yield results that are a little bit too perfect, I think. Sometimes it's the imperfections that make something work. A good example would be, we mentioned threads in a row earlier. So one of the things that I do is it's one of the final stages of when I put the whole thing together is I've created an overlay. So I shoot everything in front of just a pure black background, and the texture that you'll see in the background is that's an overlay that I've shot, and it's a combination of two textures that I actually combined. One was an icy window, and the other one was a concrete slab. And I just basically I like the scratches on one and the texture on the other one. I put together, and I created this texture that I just like. And that texture to me, just like the table or the piece of wood that people sit at, is to me that's a character in this image. They are like supporting actors.
It's like a harmonizing element. It brings it all.
It ties it all together exactly, and that's why I keep certain elements the same. The way I light stuff is always the same. The slab of wood that people sit at that looks like a table, but it's actually just it's part of a shelf. Cool. It was a shelf out of a storage room at a music center. And it broke. I saw that piece of wood and I thought, well, that looks great. I'm going to use that for something. And so these are like the things that tie everything together. But when I overlay this texture at the end, I could very simply just, select the subject, put the texture on and mask it out, no
Yeah.
problemo. But what I do instead is I like to use I like to use a brush and brush it
Yeah.
out manually, and it takes a lot longer, clearly, and it's also not as perfect. So what happens is you have bits of the texture that will maybe creep into the hairline or something like that, right?
Yeah.
But it's that makes it look realistic, and it
Yeah.
makes it look like it's all in the same scene.
Yeah.
You know, it's a little bit like light wraparound, you know, in a way. And I just personally think it looks more realistic, and that's why I keep doing it like this.
Yeah.
I could save myself
Yeah.
a good 5 minutes, you know, on every image if I didn't do it like that. But you know, still, that's just how I like to do it.
Yeah, but genuine actions produce a genuine looking image. That's the thing, because you've used the super duper computer in your head that has taken quite an amount of time to get to the stage where we're currently at. You know, but you've used all of the things that you've learned in your craft, and that's the thing. It's putting some craft into what you're doing. It's still an exciting an area it is at the moment. I still think it's being used largely in a novelty form, and I do think that they are even already are starting to look a little bit samey. You can kind of tell that they've been put in that way, especially if it's got things like fingers in it, saxophone, anything like that. Anything that's meeting the face, they're always super fun. I mean, it'll learn to get around those things, but the it's the absence of that craft that, and also you're not going to get clients that are going to turn around and say, "Oh, could you fill that with a la la la?" That's why they hired you. You know, could you fill this with a, I don't know, a gleaming gold goblet with the word brand name here, you know, on top of it? It's just, I just don't work like that. You know, it's interesting. It's an interesting area. I mean, there's more that I'm interested in from a legal perspective at the moment than I am from the actual action perspective. But there you go.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting thing. I mean, I've mentioned it in a variety of previous episodes. So to me, it feels like we're basically it's the what I call the Napster era.
Yeah,
do you remember Napster?
Where
something's new. We're still in the discovery phase. You know, we're just exploring what's going on. We're becoming aware of potential repercussions, like, you know, remuneration of artists and all the rest of it. Just like when Napster first showed up on the scene, you know, at the very beginning it was like, ooh, what? I can download music for free. I don't have to pay for it. And it's directly on my computer. Fantastic, you know.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it was only when all of a sudden, you know, those who were making the music started complaining, like, well, I can't carry on making music if I don't somehow get paid so I can pay my rent, because then I have to go and get another job, which means I won't be able to make any more music, which means that you're not getting the music that you enjoy listening to. So it comes back in a full circle, and it just screws all of us, you know. And that was what happened. You know, for those listeners old enough, you might remember that Metallica eventually went to sue Napster, and won. And that's really why
and
we
that was
have
that.
and that was that. Yeah, that was that exactly. And that's why we have Spotify and, you know, Apple Music and the likes now, because it forced the industry to rethink and go, well, actually, no, hang on a second, what can we do about this? So they figured that, you know, they come up with a system that remunerates artists to the most minimal extent possible, but at least there's something. But I think, you know, a similar thing is going to happen when it comes to AI, because there seems to be a disconnect between people creating. I'm thinking in particular like stock photography, for example.
Yeah.
You know, that could be a dicey thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. And it's depending on where you're acquiring it from. Now I know there are lots of different things around it. People who've had stuff that's been scraped from the Lion 5B database. That's so things like Stability Diffusion, Midjourney, those things. That's still potentially in hot water. Adobe stock are saying or Adobe is saying that the stuff that's generated in Firefly comes from licensed Adobe stock content and other things and out of copyright images. That those things are fine. It's still a hot area to mess with, and this is why at the moment Adobe are playing it pretty safe, and they're just saying this is experimental. Use it, but don't use it for anything commercial. That's what they're saying, and that's a thing where I am worried that some people are just like going yada yada, you know, whatever, you know, yeah. How will you know? Well, I wouldn't like to chance my career and reputation and income on how would you know? Because as sure as eggs are eggs, it's going to be a way that somewhere it will out. I mean, imagine if you'd done a shoot for for a large brand, really, really large brand, public facing, so business to consumer. They needed shoot. I'm just trying to think what sort of shoot it might be. Let's just say, for example, a food shoot, and you decided there was something else you wanted to add into the back of that, and so you generate, a nice cafe image that you can push into the background or whatever. And you've done that, and suddenly it all goes wrong, and actually that the courts in the UK and the US, and then of course around the entire world, say, no.
Yeah.
You could be, I would rather not be in that situation. I mean, I do use it. I'm going to say this very carefully, because I have used generative AI in a couple of areas of my professional work, but they are no way represented in the end product. So last week, for a developing news story, I needed an image of something, and the only thing I could actually get hold of at the time was a rendering from a technical diagram that had call-outs, bullet points all over it, with call-out lines and all of those things. And I needed this thing quickly, and I thought, I'm going to have to retouch all of that stuff out and do that before I can even use it in the way that it's going to be used, which wasn't, as I say, end product. Generative AI did help me with that, because the generative fill, I just basically lassoed all around all the ends of those bullet points, and bam, they were gone. That was useful. And I wasn't introducing anybody. It was using the actual image as a resource for that. There was nothing entered into the prompt field, so it was just going, right, I'll use the image and figure out what you need me to fix. That's useful, really, really useful. And then meant I could move it into the downstream process, in which the image was only used as a basis for the stuff that came out. So that's good. In my illustrative work, I use it to explore ideas a lot, and to some degree in things that I'm going to photograph and assemble. Yeah, I'll use it there, because I have an idea of what it is I want. I will generate prompts around it. I will put things together into essentially a mock-up, and then I'll build the actual work from there. So again, there's none of that stuff in my end product. It's all built after that. But my main concerns are around the fact that people will have a lower bar for what they want in terms of an image. That's a risk for me. I think that the legal considerations are not something you can really ignore. I spent 5 weeks talking to lawyers and listening to lawyers and reading legal stuff for one of the things I was doing for my LinkedIn Learning course, Design Tools Weekly. 5 weeks of listening to lawyers. One of them, fortunately, was a friend of mine. So that wasn't too bad. And he's actually a former president of the Association of Photographers. You might even know, have you ever heard of Nick Dunmer? So Nick Dunmer, he did a postgrad diploma in law to help with, so he's not a lawyer as such, but he's a legal advisor. He's the legal advisor for the AOP. And he was able to decode the stuff that I couldn't decode from the conversations I had with lawyers. So I'd go to him every other day, pretty much, and say, so the American lawyers said this, the British lawyers have said this, what does that actually mean? And the article in the Copyright Act that says about computer generated works, and he decoded that for me. I don't know if you know, do you know what that line is? Do you know the line in the British Copyright Act about computer generated works?
I can't remember from the top of my head.
Right, okay. Well, no, I mean, hardly anybody can because it's just super obscure. The Copyright Act says that the copyright shall be held. This is another thing. Produce something, include generative stuff in it, and it's determined that you can't just do that. Then you've got a whole load of derivative to cough up for, but that's another story. But anyway, the copyright shall be held with the person who made the arrangements. That's what the law says. And then there's no clarification in that act as to what that means, because it was done in 1996.
Yeah.
And there weren't too many computers around then.
No, true, yeah.
You know, and certainly not ones that were generating works on their own. I mean, Photoshop was only just a few years old at that point. But yeah, so it's a hotbed of stuff. I should imagine you'll be talking about it a lot in podcasts for quite a while.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's and it's only, I think it's only the beginning. We're still I mean, the thing to remember is that we're talking about something that's just in beta.
Yeah,
for the most part. It's not even out yet.
No.
It's
exciting, but caveats.
Exactly. I mean, it's exciting. I think it's I think of it as probably a similar event as when Photoshop first arrived on the scene, and all of those guys who were shooting film previously just went, "What? What's happening there?" But I think eventually it will take its place, within the realm of post processing.
Yeah. So if just quickly, if you'd for example taken a shot of someone walking along through a desert in a lovely big flowing dress. I see lots of shots like that. But deserts being deserts don't always behave the way you want them to. And of course, another thing in deserts are footprints. Yeah. So, let's just say that your art director said, "Oh, that ground just doesn't look dry enough." Right? Now, you going and acquiring an image of a dusty, cracked desert and then manipulating it into the perspective that you need it to use it is fine. And that's what has happened ever since Photoshop introduced layers, right? In Photoshop 3, yeah, that's fine. But you know where the dusty floor came from, and the chances are you paid for that image, or you're giving attribution for that image. To my mind, what needs to happen for me, if I'm truly settled with generative AI in Photoshop and Lightroom, I need to know that I'm not exploiting anybody else's stuff without their consent. Well, I mean, that's the virtue of exploitation, right? Is that you're doing it without their consent. But I'd want it to be, if Adobe is saying this is ethical AI, I want hard proof of that. Ideally.
Yeah, and a noticeable, or sort of how can I put this? A system that we can all understand.
Yeah.
That's the thing. I mean, it's a little bit like, Spotify. I always use that as an example. You pay
It's a good
subscription.
example.
Yeah, you pay subscription every month, and for that you can listen to music, and that money, at least part of it, albeit a very small part of it, will eventually go to the artist that you listen to. And so although, I mean, as a musician and as a former session musician, I used to work in the music industry, and I still don't feel 100% comfortable with the sort of minimal remuneration that artists will get from like literally millions of listens on Spotify. I think there's still sort of an imbalance between, the way the end product is used and how the original artist is being recompensed for that.
Yeah.
And of course, I think that because I'm old enough to have seen the other side, if that makes sense. Younger artists that are coming up now don't have that advantage, or maybe a disadvantage nowadays. Maybe it's just, maybe it's just better to just, accept the way things are at the moment.
Things are. Yeah.
But I think, it's a similar thing with generative AI. I think I like the fact that Adobe are limiting the pool of images that they pick from.
Yeah.
And at least there's a certain degree of control over that, so that you
Yeah.
can actually say, okay, well, here's a pool of images, and here's a number of contributors to that pool. And then if we did think of, let's say, a subscription based system, for example, then it's fairly straightforward, and we're
Yeah.
used to those kind of systems already now, so
It's
that
true.
to me would make sense.
Yes, and Adobe actually are going quite a way with things like the Content Authenticity Initiative, and also the introduction of a do not train meta tag in the image. The only thing is with that, and that's still an area where they're still working on working on introducing that. How do you make that work? How do you make sure that nobody does it? Nobody, if a system comes across that tag, how do you make sure that it ignores it for those things? So they're working very, very hard on doing that. I love that. The only thing I do love, would love more, is if they made it so it wasn't elective. Yeah, so that automatically and by default, you had do not train on all of your images. Yeah. Or you could just bulk apply that, which you probably will be able to in the fullness of time in Bridge or Lightroom, be able to just apply a do not train tag to it. But I would much rather you didn't have to do that unless you specifically wanted your images to be included in that. And at some point, hopefully in the future, be compensated for your part in that thing. It's come very, very quickly, very, very, it's come a long way very, very quickly, I think is what I'm trying to say there.
Yeah, it's been extraordinary. The speed at which this technology has all of a sudden not only appeared on the scene, but also dramatically improved from, I remember the first of news reports of DALL-E, which was last August, between now and then. It's not even a year. And how far, has that come? And the thing is, I think, AI is, of course, it's a big news story in a sense, in terms of technology, but there's VR on the horizon as well, which is now seeming to make strides. How do you see changes in the landscape of design and content creation and so on and so forth with VR?
Yeah, well, that is an area that I don't spend too much time in at the moment. AR, so augmented reality, is an area that I'm spending a lot of time. VR, I don't really know. I'm still not sure about how I feel entirely about why, gaming VR, perfect. Simulation VR for certain reasons, also great. I just don't know about that. I don't know how healthy that's going to be for people more than anything else in their day-to-day lives, But I mean, I could well be a dinosaur on the edge of meeting that great meteorite. I don't know, but it's I don't think it's going to go away. But I just really don't know at the moment, because I really don't. It's just not an area. I worked with a couple of when I was at Adobe. A couple of the accounts I went on were gaming accounts. I remember seeing very, very early VR sets. An amusing story, for not on the podcast, I've got about one of those with a colleague, but the who was told specifically only to look forward, didn't, and paid the price. But anyway, like I said, another story for another day. Yeah, I don't know. I'd love to have a play with one of those headsets that Apple came out with or have announced at WWDC, but $3,700 for one of those? Maybe not at the moment.
Yeah, it seems nuts. Although,
Yeah.
I mean,
It's almost as much as my electricity bill.
Well, exactly. Exactly. I want to talk to you a little bit about collaboration between photographers and designers and clients, for example.
Yeah.
Are there any sort of emerging tools or platforms that you believe will shape that form of collaboration in the future?
So in terms of imagery, I mean, there are already systems that will work within the Adobe sphere that that can help with collaboration. I mean, Creative Cloud is a collaborative platform. You can still use it to share single images or bunches of images or entire shoots in that way, and have feedback on them. In terms of video, of course, Adobe have Frame.io, which is a fantastic. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but in terms of working with clients and other collaborators with video, it's fantastic. You know, you can drop a comment on any part of a timeline, literally on top of the footage. You just add your comment, or you can highlight things, you know, mark them up. And when that footage appears for the other people using on Frame.io, they can literally click on that comment, much like you might do in a PDF, for example, or a Word document even, or a Google document, and it will take you directly to that part, which is brilliant. I'm trying to think. I mean, that really, I stick most of my stuff, because I've worked with Adobe for such a long time, and we're still good friends, and I still work with them, just not on staff. I tend to think, you've made this already, it works perfectly well for me, so I'm happy with using that. So I don't really use anything outside of that, because for me it works well. But then again, I'm not shooting at the volume that you're probably shooting. Yeah, in that, you know, it's not my main occupation, but it is connected to my work. So I maybe I don't even know if I make a tenth of the images that you make, but you know, but for me that works. Yeah, those are the things I use. To be honest, I use all of the stuff within Creative Cloud that I have access to, and it works for me.
Fantastic. And you mentioned Adobe Express earlier.
Yep.
Where are the advantages of using Adobe Express for photographers who want to maybe create, you know, more imagery for social media? If we just come back to that for a second.
Yeah, sure. So Adobe, do you know Adobe? When I first heard of Adobe Express, I was like, oh, why would I look at that? But I was very, very wrong. And actually, it is a great tool. If you want to do things quickly and get them scheduled into your social calendar so that they deploy without any further interaction from you on desktop, Adobe Express is a fantastic tool. So if you want to add a little bit of text or something else, or tune your image or tone it, or do any of those things, Adobe Camera Express has, it's even got like a tiny subset of the Lightroom tools to play with. So you can adjust the I don't think there's I can't recall if there's an exposure control, but you can adjust the brightness, the contrast, you can adjust the tint, you can tune the shadows, the highlights, the midtones, all of those things with a bunch of sliders. Very, very quick. You're in one interface. And then you think, okay, well, I've tuned that the way I want, I've cropped it the way I want. Or let's say you want to produce for, let's say you're producing for Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, yeah, all of those things, and you want to do it all at the same time in one file. Adobe Express lets you do that. Yeah, I know here I'm talking about the current beta that it works. It does it in the earlier version, but in the current beta, it is so much more streamlined to do that. Then you can do that. You could get, so let's say I worked on, if I thought I want to use this image and the primary place I want to put it is in Instagram. Yeah, then I'll add all of the things I want to it. Yeah, so I might want to add a little bit of text. Yeah, I might want to tone it slightly. I might even want a moving element on it, which I can do there as well. So you can animate parts of that. Once I've got that and all of the elements that I want across all of the platforms that I want to do or to deploy to, I just simply say resize. And then you've got a whole list of more social platforms than you could possibly imagine. There's a lot. And you can just check, and then do duplicate and resize. And the next thing, you've got a project with all of those things resized. There's some intelligence in there, so you'll notice things have moved, yeah, to certain boundaries. And you, of course, move them you tune that to be however you want. And then you push that into the scheduler in Adobe Express and publish from there. That is a good system, a really good system. And it impresses me no end. I love it. I spoke about it at Stanford School of Continuing Medicine actually a little while ago, which was just a weird ask. We'd like you to come and talk to us about Adobe Express. Okay, cool. Why? And then I forgot that in America, of course, physicians have to market themselves. So either they or people that work for them have to have those kind of skills for marketing themselves. Interesting stuff. But yeah, I would have a look at that. It's a great way to push. And if you're doing things videos, if you want to put out a load of different video thumbnails for that, it can do all of those. And again, put them all into the same project. And if you want one of them to be animated, animate it. Easy.
Sounds like I should be looking into that.
You should definitely. And if you should be looking at it. And I think it's ridiculous. It's something like £8 a month or whatever it is.
So Tony, if there was one tip that you would give photographers who are looking to sort of boost their online presence through the imagery online and on social media, what would it be?
Create a frequency that you're happy with and that you can sustain, for when you post. And that will be the one thing that brings you into more people's feeds. It's the one thing I'm great at reminding people of. It's the one thing I'm terrible at. I just rely on my charm, good looks, and humour, but to see how it goes, and we can see how that's working out. But from what I know, it is choose a frequency that you can sustain, right? Because if you say, right, I'm going to post every day, you probably can't unless you've got a team with you, right? Because it's more, if you try and do it, right? Don't actually post, just try and do it for 3 weeks. And say, I'm going to create a post every day to see how that works out, right? Because it involves a lot of effort. So choose a frequency. The frequency doesn't, if the frequency is once a year, you might as well just post erratically whenever you want to. Weekly is good if you can sustain it, yeah. Semi-weekly is brilliant if you can sustain it, yeah. So if you can say, right, okay, I can post twice a week, that's a good frequency. Yeah, it means that after a couple of months, the algorithm will start reporting, that you are a reliable poster and will start to promote you. It's that simple. Yeah, so do that. Choose a frequency that works for you and keep that going. That is the single best tip I think I can offer you or offer everyone here to improve their presence.
Fantastic. Tony, it was an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for talking to us. And hopefully we'll see you again in the not too distant future, and definitely at the photography show.
Fantastic. It's been great talking to you, Kirst. Thanks ever so much for having me on. Really, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Okay, folks, that's all for today. What an incredible chat with the design ninja himself. But before we go, let me just recommend another episode that I think you'll like. Episode 103 with Adobe legend Russell Preston Brown. I'm sure you'll love it. And for those of you who are listening to the audio version of this podcast, did you know that there's a fully fledged video version over on YouTube with plenty of examples of our guest photography in full Technicolor? All you have to do is go over to YouTube, search for Camera Shake Podcast, and you'll be able to watch all past episodes on there. And if you are on YouTube already, get in touch and leave a comment. Remember to hit the like button, ring that bell, and share with your friends. You can help us reach a greater audience all over the world. Once again, thank you for listening and watching, and I'll see you next Thursday.